Good afternoon and welcome to the Leadership Development Group's Future of Work webinar series. Our first presentation is on creating meaning, presented by Dr. Robert Simpson, co-founder and president of the Difference Leadership Group. I am Amy Reamer, Director of Communications with the Leadership Development Group. And just a few quick notes before we get started. Please note that all attendees are on listen-only mode and automatically on mute for the duration of the webinar. We'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit your queries via the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will present them to Rob at the end of the call. Additionally, please note that this webinar is being recorded. We will provide a link to the recordings to all attendees and appreciate your attendance and hope that you find this webinar valuable. Now I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Tracy Duberman, President and CEO of the Leadership Development Group, for a brief introduction.
Thank you, Amy. I am delighted to welcome all of you to our Future of Work series. Before I introduce the series and topic and speaker today, I want to take a quick moment to introduce myself and the Leadership Development Group. I have the distinct honor and privilege to lead TLD Group, a firm deeply committed to developing leaders and their teams to execute strategy through a variety of talent development solutions, ranging from executive coaching to team development to succession planning and customized leadership academies. Our global team is comprised of management psychologists, certified executive coaches, academics, and tenured consultants who have expertise coaching and consulting to leaders and teams across diverse businesses. Given who we are and what we do, we trust you'll find this 5-part series both thought-provoking and practically applicable to the work you do and the teams you lead in your own organizations. As we all know, the global pandemic has changed the very nature of work. We've been forced to accelerate our adoption of new technologies and create and escalate new types of work and working relationships. As a result, we are facing myriad challenges, including how to engage and empower leaders and teams in new and different ways. We strongly believe that leaders have an unprecedented window of opportunity to shape what ultimately becomes the future of work. As you attend this series, I encourage you to reflect on the learnings as you plan your leadership response. We welcome you to apply the tools we provide and reach out to us over the course of the series for feedback and additional support. Now on to the headliner. Next slide. Rob Simpson. Rob is co-founder and president of the Difference Leadership Group and a senior consultant with TLD Group. Rob is a seasoned leadership consultant, a practiced licensed clinician, and a former health system CEO. As such, Rob truly understands the challenges and benefits of leadership transformation. As you can see from this bio, Rob has received a number of top citations and acknowledgments from some heady organizations across the country for his dedication to mental health and leadership. So now, without further ado, Rob, take it away.
Thank you, Tracy, very much. I'm very excited about this presentation today, and thank you for this opportunity. Let's look at the learning objectives that we're going to cover. And we are going to move fast through this presentation. There's a lot of material to cover, and we have 45-50 minutes to do that. We'll have some polling questions along the way and then questions and answers in the end. So what's the first objective? There are 4. Managing grief and loss. What I want to do is focus on how essential the effective management of grief and loss experienced by employees in this pandemic is to the creation of a culture of purpose and meaning to drive the work. The second will be around the issue of recasting purpose and meaning for, now there we go, avast, go away. Have a clear, well-specified purpose statement that states both how and why the company makes a positive impact on employees, the environment, and the community. We're going to talk about that for the employees during this period. And the third objective is to reimagine cultural norms, because change is happening. And reimagining cultural norms helps create the feeling of connection in an organization where the work is accomplished both virtually and in person, reinforcing a culture of resilience and innovation by creating total engagement with employees. So the fourth objective is to think about how we balance the transactional and transformational leadership competencies leaders need to move through change. So it's refocusing this balance, driving the focus and drive with transactional skills and the listening and mentoring to create engagement and connection through the transformational skills. So those are the 4 objectives. So first of all, this pandemic is not similar to the usual crisis leaders face. It's a pandemic, first time in 100 years. And there's no cure, and we await the full rollout of vaccines, and who knows what else is on the horizon with the variances. The worldwide economy has been disrupted. Politics has certainly disrupted trust. Forces of fear and denial grew and growing as politics and the science of public health clashed in this past year. We'll see what happens going forward. And it's created significant disruption in the workplace. I think we'd all agree with this. So the question is, the rhythm has changed in the workplace. Everyday life has been disruptive. It may never return to the way it was, but we have to remember that there were actually trends on the way before. Automation, digitalization, contractors, gig workers, cybersecurity, all these things were happening. And the pandemic has accelerated these trends. 1/3 of U.S. jobs have been somewhat at risk. And then the question of employee grief in the middle of all this must be addressed. So what's happened with the losses of the workplace? You know this, you live with it. You've lost colleagues, either by moving on to a different job or not having a job, or you've moved to virtual remote or hybrid models. Incomes have changed. The old normal is not there. The creative combustion, we'll talk about that, perhaps doesn't exist as it did with face-to-face, and no boundaries on the workday. People get up, they work all day till they go to bed. And team relationships have been disrupted. The community losses are also somewhat legion. We've experienced significant deaths, quarantines, no school events by and large, holidays alone, no vacations, no family visits. A lot of arenas for employees to feel grief. So the first polling question is, does your organization expect leaders to address employee grief brought on by the pandemic? And there you can submit your answers.
Right. So if you could take a moment to answer this question, does your organization expect leaders to address employee grief brought on by the pandemic? Yes. Expectations unclear. They ask leaders to refer issues to employee assistance programs, or no. We'll give it another second or two.
Okay.
Oops. So I don't know if you can see the poll, but 42% said yes. I think we are out of your
right.
Out of the presentation mode.
Can you see the presentation?
Yeah. So if you go back down to that where you were.
There we go.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to just share the results. 42% said yes. 35% expectations unclear. 15% said they asked leaders to refer issues to employee assistance programs, and 8% no.
Okay.
So you have to go back into slide mode to restart your presentation.
There we go. There we go.
All right, perfect.
Thank you, Amy. So 42% and 35. Okay, quite a number of people who are wondering about this. So let's talk about what's happened in the hybrid work model. I like this slide from McKinsey, trading a colleague for a child while home with your kids, many people trying to multitask. The chief complaints about the work environment, Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, calls it creative combustion. The serendipity that results when people work side by side, bouncing ideas off each other with innovative ways to address problems is different by Zoom. Creative combustion cars face-to-face, he would say. To generate the kind of innovation that drives real growth at a company, people need a certain amount of face-to-face contact with their colleagues. We have ever been social in the way we create ideas together, is what he would say. So the pandemic has created this stress and trauma, anxiety, depression, grief, negative impacts on mental health, I would say and argue. And leaders have to transition to a ministerial role. It's a word that often raises people's eyebrows when I bring it up, but let's stay with it for a moment. Focus on what is being grieved. The rhythm, the form of stability of the day-to-day has changed, the mix of jobs have changed, loss, some gain, many changed. Requires a focus on what's been lost, what's being grieved. Requires, I think, to tell the story of the change and grief. Only by making it safe to be not okay, I believe, can the work of disruption and innovation proceed. Then the organization can move forward to acceptance, discuss a renewed purpose with employees based on what's happened and how we're going to get on top of this. So I think that your leaders have to think about psychological safety to talk about grief. Yes, I'm a clinician, but I've been a hard-hitting CEO in organizations where I've had to make these very tough, focused decisions and style. And I do believe that psychological safety, the absence of interpersonal fear, is a goal that all of us have to create in organizations through our engagement scores and engagement processes. So the pandemic lack of physical safety is almost a metaphor for creating a shared fear about other things. By role modeling vulnerability, I think leaders make it okay to be not okay. And leaders should be saying to employees, tell me more about your worries. I think that tell me more is the most powerful statement a leader can say in general. Tell me more. You can look very wise saying tell me more when you don't know the answer. People will tell you what they're feeling. So it make it acceptable for people to miss what they've lost and what they're fearful about. Then you can weave the story that employees need to hear. It's metaphorically. Stories are conversations about employees in the workplace are feeling, and they're our leaders' most powerful tool to promote transformation in an organization that is in grief. Simon Sinek would probably be jumping on that. So Warren Bennis, if you know him, former university professor, he passed away, sort of the godfather of leadership in his writing. Uncommon eloquence marks leaders. Effective leaders put words to the formless longings and deeply felt needs of others. They create communities out of words. Love that statement. So as leaders tell the story, they elevate to be, put your meditation hat on, to the same level as to do. Get out of our heads inside and figure what's going on. In the old normal environment, it was about business leadership and setting up strategy. That's what we did as leaders, focus and drive. In the pandemic environment, it's about helping people maintain morale in the face of uncertainty and disruption, so they can get back to focus and drive. Leaders have to show up differently, I would argue. Use a new lens to notice meditation skills again. Notice how employees are feeling and to process grief in order to move employees in the organization forward. So all change is loss, and loss has to be grieved, I would argue. We don't yet know what is gone for now and what's gone forever. We have ideas, but grief in the workplace is defined by the prolonged level of uncertainty and disruption of normal routines. These conversations below will tell the story. So employee conversations, I'm sure you've heard them. I miss the creative combustion, maybe they use that phrase, but I miss my work family. I spend more time with my work family than my real family, often true. I miss being with the team. The manager conversations might be something like, I miss the loss of safety at work. Are we going to get sick? Someone bringing it in, whatever. I miss management by walking around. I looking at a colleague in the eye without a mask. Laughing with them creates a very different kind of bond than can be achieved virtually. And then everyone's having these kinds of conversations, I would say. I miss the certainty of knowing, the buzz of shared success, celebrations at work. We have lots of mini celebrations all the time, even coffee break celebrations. I do like the freedom of virtual work. Many people say that, others say just the opposite, but it can be very lonely. So what's the importance of naming grief and allowing people to process it? There's something powerful about naming grief, frankly. It helps us feel what's frankly inside us. Remember as a child, your mother would say, Robbie, you're feeling anxious. Oh, is that what that is? I'm jumping out of my skin. Oh, okay, got it, Mom. Fighting it doesn't help because your body is producing the feeling, a normal neurobiological process. We have the old brain and the new brain. We have the limbic system, the amygdala, and we have the, the cognitive functions of the brain. But if we allow the feelings to happen, they will happen, and it empowers us. Then we're not victims. We can find our way. Create a process, I would argue, for employees to process grief with their leaders. I'm not talking about psychotherapy sessions, although there's something psychotherapeutic about it. So emotions, I would argue, need motion, need a conversation. David Kessler, who wrote with Kubler-Ross that famous book on death and dying, said that leaders are not always prepared to assist employees in managing grief, and grief is not anything we've ever tackled well in the workplace, he would argue. Business and leaders don't usually recognize it. Employee productivity is so impacted by loss, and loss is everywhere right now. So if you acknowledge the stages of grief that are happening and have happened in the organizations, you might get someplace. So what are the stages of grief from Kubler-Ross and Kessler? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and meaning. So leaders should begin by acknowledging their own grieving. This has not been easy for me either, folks, and I want to tell you about that. And I think employees can start to feel a connection they need in times of loss with their leader and their work family. So stages of grief are not linear. We bounce back and forth, but here are some sample pandemic responses. Denial. Well, we said this a lot early on. This virus won't affect us. Yeah, we did. Anger. You're making me stay at home and taking away my activities. Not happy. Bargaining. Okay, if I social distance for 2 weeks, everything will get better, right? Then I can come back to work in my office and be with my friends. Didn't happen in some places. Sadness. We might say sadness is also depression, but let's use the word sadness more apt in an organization. I don't know when this will end, and I'm unhappy in so many ways. I just miss the way it was. Acceptance is, this is happening. Okay, I have to figure out how to proceed. Acceptance, as you might imagine, is where the power lies. If I can accept it, we can find control. I can wash my hands and wear a mask. I can keep a safe distance. I can learn how to work virtually. And then meaning, we've grown. This is survivable. We will survive. We might even be better. We just might be a better organization in the end. And I think some people feel that way. So leaders transition to this ministerial role. There are 3 key first steps. Just a quick review. Define the transformation work, the rhythm stability has changed, mix of jobs has changed, etc. Focus on grief. It's a ministerial function. It's healing. It's what's been lost, what's been grieved, what's being grieved. Normalize this stage. Say it's okay for everybody. That just saying it's okay to have these feelings creates a culture of safety. It's okay to be not okay. And then you tell the story. By making it safe to be not okay, the work of disruption can proceed. You unstick it. People start moving again. You can move forward and redefine a new sense of work and meaning and purpose. And essentially the organization can start to heal perhaps, and hopefully many of them will survive and potentially grow again. So that's the first part on grief. The second is about recasting purpose and meaning in this process. So team charters, I like team charters. They define the team purpose. I'll give you an example of one in a minute. They create clarity of goals. Purpose is key, frankly, to a high-performing team. Big buzz in the literature for several years, as we know. And teams have to codify their rules of engagement before diving into the task mode. And I will tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Purpose statements are really around why we do it. We capture meaning, commitment, inspiration, motivation, why we do this. It states why the organization will make a positive impact on employees, the environment, and the community. Purpose statements can be global with the organization, but I argue that having the purpose statements down at the team level is a way to capture the whole process. So the critical point is that leaders can direct employees with a mission. This is what we do, get going. But I don't think it can lead employees without inspiring an internal sense of purpose, why I do this. With the organization's purpose, why we do it. If you put I and we together, you've got something. So team, if we look at the purpose building exercise with employees, it'd be something like this. Let's talk about purpose, why we exist. It's going to provide some inspiration. Mission is what we do every day. It'll drive our loyalty. It'll bring us clarity. Vision is where we're going to head, clarify our strategy. Yes, I know we had a vision before the pandemic, but now we got to rethink it a little bit. What about our values? Well, what about the desired culture we want to create? We had a culture before, but I bet you it's changing. And the brand, how do we want to position the unique value proposition the team wishes to achieve? So here are some team brand examples. We're the can-do team, maybe we're the focus team, maybe we're the innovative team, maybe we're the never give up team, we're the A team, maybe the B team, whatever. But words matter in how people feel about themselves and their brand. Everybody's got a brand, every team's got a brand, every organization has a brand. So helping individual member purpose with team purpose starts to become helpful. If you take someone's job role, their job function, and their job purpose, let's see what that might look like. So if you're a pediatrician, you provide pediatric assessment and treatment. That's your function. But your purpose is to assure that children return home to their families healthy, to their mommies and daddies. The chief medical officer, my job function is to coordinate physician services in a hospital. But their purpose may be to provide leadership, inspiration for the medical staff to cure disease. Perhaps a higher sense of what their calling may be. A team member is certainly be accountable as a member of the team's strategic mission. They have a particular role and function, but their personal purpose may be slightly different, and they may want to engage it with the team purpose. Maybe their personal purpose is to always find what's wrong and fix it. And maybe the team purpose is to fix things that aren't working well. Okay, now we got a marriage. A team leader, their job function, be accountable to the team and the organization to lead these plans, but each member's personal purpose has to be tied into the team purpose. And I think a team leader who can do that really understands how the cogs of the system come together and help people with that, both function and purpose. So a team charter, you can use something like this format. You can take people away for a half a day, and you can go from current state, defining all the purpose, and the left-hand side here, mission, vision, how we're going to achieve it. You can commit to these core values. Obviously, organizations have core values, care, commitment, etc. But maybe there's some core values specific to the team that should be looked at. There's a brand the team has that can be readdressed. Maybe they want to change it. And what about team agreements? We will say the unsayable. We get it done. We're respectful, but we will speak out loud, out to each other. Whatever those team agreements are, in a pandemic, good time to rethink them. And then create some quality action teams to achieve this. Publish the charter, get it out there, put it on the wall for people to see it in your team. Increase communication, that's another one. How do we increase communication? You might want to have a small action team that does that. And then in the end, the future, you can sort of imagine what it might be down the road. What will it achieve? That helps you with a gap analysis about where you got to get to. So just an interesting checklist to potentially use. Engaging individual purpose. So if I think of teams as having normal stages of team development, in a crisis, and just normally when they form anyway. A brand new team is going to form. There are certain things that have to be done there. They're going to storm, they're going to have some conflict, they're going to create new norms and clarity, and then they're going to start performing. That's sort of how teams generally tend to work when they get together. And each stage has a definable process that the leader has to engage with employees. The stages of grief are intermingling with this, in my judgment now. These stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and meaning, as we've said, and they must be addressed, I think, to support an employee's ability to align with the team development stages. And I'll tell you how I think they line up in a minute. The leader's role is to create the psychological safety so you can do this. You can start talking about each stage of grief in supporting the psychological safety so you can get on to the stages of development, get new purpose and meaning out of it all. So here we go, complex slide, but stay with me. Wave one, stages of team development. Forming, looking for expectations, skills, roles, individual team purpose, mission and vision articulate. That could happen in general without the pandemic, but in the pandemic, I would say we're back to that. We're back to storming as well. The goals get debated. Some of us are here, some of us are home, some of us aren't here at all. So subgroups of form, it gets to be a complicated period. You have to align it with the grief. Hey, I wish this wasn't happening. Paralysis. I want to avoid the inevitable. I'm really annoyed about this. A lot of bottled up feelings about that. And I'm seeking in vain to find a way out, but I can't find it. So I'd say that a little bit is what the leader has to start looking at. Denial, anger, and bargaining are going on as forming and storming are occurring as you're rethinking your team purpose in the pandemic. And then I think when you get to wave 2, as you get out of the first 2 stages, you're now looking at the renorming, agreement on individual team and purpose, recasting it. Mission, vision, values emerge, team cohesion starts to happen. Your team playbook changes, new work norms are created. You're going to start performing and get some consensus and clarity, and high performing teams obviously start to deal with the intertribal, inter-team rivalries that deal in organizations. Much harder on Zoom, I have to say, to deal with that stage. And then aligning the depression that's happening with the stages. People have been sad about this. They're now trying to find some acceptance as you renorm and perform, and they're getting some meaning out of it because you're leading the integration of these team development stages and stages of grief. So another way to look at it is leaders have to use transactional and transformational skills. So if you look at the first wave again, it's the forming and storming, the grief stage in the middle, the dialing and bargaining, and there's a lot of resistance to this change and it has to be talked about and grieved. The leadership skill is to say, let's create sprints. We will have team huddles where we're going to talk about components of this problem that we're addressing. The stages of grief and the stages of our team development in a new world, in a pandemic world. And the marathon is about stringing together a series of huddles that move the team toward the marathon of undetermined length now. We don't know how long it's going to go on, but we do need support and engagement from the leader, and that's the transformational skills. Calm the storm, build the culture, contain the fears. Wave 2 is as you move into these norming and performing and high performing by dealing with the stages of grief, getting to acceptance and maybe even transcendence. The skills are grief and healing, engagement and story, and creating and inspiring a new sense of purpose and mission. Wave 1 and wave 2. So a sample leadership story might be something like this. A leader might say, today I'm going to talk about the stages of grief, how they interact with the stages of our team development. Look, we've all been in the first 3 stages earlier this year. This is our first wave of reacting to the pandemic. We denied the extent of the crisis. We didn't want to reform the way our company works. We stormed, became angry about changes. We continued to storm. We tried to bargain our way back to the way it was. We didn't succeed. So we've been grieving our old normal way of work. Depression set in. We're dealing with a second wave now. We're reacting to this pandemic. So employees are having a hard time. They're grieving losses of life under the old normal. We've laid employees off. We're gone to work remotely in a hybrid model. My job as a leader is to address together the grief we're experiencing so we can move to acceptance, have a new way of working, and finding new meaning to inspire us. So we refocused our individual and team purpose. I believe we saved our organization doing it. And perhaps, and I think that's an inspiring thing for people to say as a leader at any level, I think by changing the way we worked, we saved the team and we maybe even saved the organization and our relationship with each other. Perhaps we can become even better as we care about and heal each other on this journey. And it will be a journey, folks. It's a marathon. So now we're going to go to stage 3. Imagine the cultural norms. So cultural norms must be reimagined or they will undermine team progress. Definitions of culture, Harvard Business Review. Organizational culture is civilization in the workplace with all its complexities. Organizational culture is the sum of core values and rituals which serve as glue to integrate members of the organization, not to be taken lightly. And it oversimplifies the situation. Large organizations assume there's only one culture. Now, many subcultures. Culture is at once intangible, palpable, the sum total of ideologies, principles, traditions, values that pulsate, boom, 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 through the organization. I always like to play the song, This Is How We Do It, when we had a team meeting, because people would say, wow, that's so inspiring. We're going to dance through this problem. There was a culture building song dance component. Polling question 2, Amy.
Good Great, thank you. Does your organization actively train leaders to develop leadership competencies that affect employee engagement and morale? Yes, in planning stage, expectation unclear, or no? So we'll give you a few minutes to, or a few seconds rather, to answer that. And just as a reminder, if you do have any questions as Rob is going through these, you can put those into the question pane. Okay. Share the poll. Okay, so 44% of the responses were yes, 28% were in planning stage, 12% expectation unclear, and 16% no.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Good.
All
Let
right.
me do presentation mode. Yeah, about 44% yes trained in culture dynamics. Many not, obviously, half or more. Okay. So these steps to build a resilient, focused organization. What's off to the side of these arrows? Well, leaders have to make the case that the process of addressing stages of grief and team development and purpose is culture work, and it helps to rebuild a resilient organization. The domains of culture must be explored and possibly, more than likely, be changed, and I'm going to talk about that now. So we talked about the stages of grief, denial, etc. We talked about the team stages of forming, storming, etc. They are influenced by, no surprise, culture domains. Culture has domains. The domain of purpose, the domain of core values, worksite rules, which clearly change when you go to offsite or hybrid. Team meeting rules, they're different offsite. Check-in processes, how do people check in? At work, it was much easier. We checked in culturally at the coffee in the morning. But also we had team huddles and check-in processes there. They're changing. Accountabilities, reward and recognition, celebrations, mythologies, the most fun part of maybe culture. And I think I would say about changing culture, people love progress, they hate change. I think that was Charles Schwab actually who said that, but I think it's true. They love to see progress, but boy, people don't like change very much in general. Not some people do, but mostly it's tough. So how do you explore cultural mythologies? What are they? Employees believe that cultural myths are truths that govern interpersonal and inter-team behaviors. We've seen that across the country recently. They play a fundamental role in sustaining the culture and unifying the vision of the past, present, and the future in an organization. We all have family myths. Think of yourself and what myth you are part of in your family. These myth stories consolidate around key domains that you just saw on the previous slide, but rights of celebration, communication, work processes, team, acceptable behaviors, etc., power. So examples of domain myths. Celebrations. We only celebrate over the holidays. Really? That's probably a myth, but maybe not. Communications, always top down first, then bottom up. Well, some organizations just the opposite. Work processes, do the same thing over and over and over again. Maybe, maybe not. Let's look at that. We don't process our phases of team development. More than likely, that tends to be true. It's always good to say, we're moving out of forming, we're in storming. Storming is okay. Don't worry, it doesn't mean we're collapsing. Storming helps us get to the stage of performing, everybody. Acceptable behavior, we don't challenge authority. Maybe not. Maybe it's harder under Zoom. Don't know. Change, we have no say in how change happens around here. You have no idea how much we listen to you about what you want to do differently. A lot of myths here too. Innovation, only the senior leaders get to do that. And we can do small little sustaining things. They get to do the big disruptive stuff. Sometimes that's true, and frankly, oftentimes it's not. What about power? It's only in the C-suite. Maybe, maybe not. Some myths. So this is a checklist you can use if you have a team meeting. You can use this checklist to say, let's explore the organizational overall culture, the positives and the negatives in these domains. And then let's look at the team culture the same way in the same domains, positive and negative. It's always interesting to line them up afterwards, what people learn and what they say. It's like kids say the darndest things in that old TV show. So resilience checklist to identify components of a resilience-focused strategy. Let's think about that, moving off the domains of culture. What is a resilience-focused strategy, and what are the specific tasks to reimagine the work? So I like the 4 I's. It's from the National Council on Behavioral Health Complex Trauma. Remember too that sometimes sadness and depression, there's post-traumatic stress disorder that some employees will have about crises. And that really is an EAP referral. Just saying that for the moment. But the 4 I's, identify best practices to build resiliency at individual and systemic levels. Okay, maybe daily pandemic employee huddles, and maybe the leader has stakeholder huddles with other leaders inside and outside the organization that address homework strategies, and that you then learn to string together the sprints of the transactional day-to-day huddle focus to the running the marathon over time. How do they link together? Inoculate the culture from stress and trauma. Sort of good metaphor with the vaccine. By proactively reimagining the work of the organization in the context of old, new cultural shifts, cultural domains explored in team meetings. The old work culture gets to be reimagined through the pandemic work quality action teams. We did it this way, we gotta do it this way going forward. Recast purpose and mission and values and team brand, as we've talked earlier, how to do that. Recast and innovate work from home technologies. So that's the inoculating the culture, giving people a vaccine of work shift. And then instill a shared vocabulary. I think vocabulary matters. You're as a leader, we are English professors. We must tell people what is happening around them and have language for it. And it needs to be rethought through the pandemic to create resiliency. And so you can do that by adopting a pandemic vocabulary and language, adopt a lexicon, that addresses a strategy for the pandemic marathon with sprints to ensure resilience. What are those language? What is the strategy? And then the last I is improve the health of the entire organization by promoting restoration, health and growth. How do you do that? Well, you can establish pandemic health checkups, checking in with people at certain key points, and align them to specific KPIs that track the reimagination of the work. Is it work? Is our stress down? Is our engagement up? Create a record of new skills that everybody is adopting to reconceptualize the work virtually and inside the organization. If you're in a hospital, we know that hospitals have sustaining small innovations because patients are at risk and we make big, huge disruptions. But sometimes we need a disruption, like creating an offsite ICU, et cetera, or a specialty ICU in the organization that we didn't have before because of the extent of the potential for death in patients. Last objective, balancing these transactional and transformational competencies. So the leadership skills to recreate a resilient, purpose-driven organization. Goal, refocus employee understanding of the importance of leaders balancing these two skills, transactional, transformational. Transactional, focus and drive, tell more about this in a minute, and the plus the transformational skills of listening, inspiring, and mentoring equal a supportive purpose and meaning culture, creates a culture of change, creates cultural change as well, fuels resilience, makes people feel like they're going to survive, and assures organizational survival. So if we look at it another way, the skills that create the best opportunity for a resilience-based culture, the pandemic marathon with sprints, so to speak, the transactional skills in the blue being the sprints of focus and drive, making huddles, et cetera, and workplace projects happen, and stringing them together with the support to create this marathon that nobody knows when it's going to end. And then the creation, that tends to create a resilience-based culture because you're also focusing on culture change, purpose, and meaning. So balancing them, inoculate the culture, create this resilience, focus on the early stages of grief, refocus the stress, reimagine the work. The transactional is driving the mission, the huddles, the short-term outcomes. People like to see something happen. Short-term outcomes are good. Being decisive as a leader, focusing on these sprints, In the transformational side, building the resilience, inspiring engagement to purpose, and communication, emotional intelligence. It requires some, I would say some mentoring yourself with other leaders who are doing the same thing. This is the hard work, I think. And then stringing them together, marathon of undetermined length, stringing them together. You're now in the later stages of grief. Your people are starting to move through finding acceptance and meaning. And it happened because you've refocused emotional support. I believe fundamentally that's how you get to moving on in this pandemic through grief, is by providing that emotional support. Polling question 3.
Great, let me pull that up. Does your organization train leaders in transactional and transformational leadership competencies to manage team growth? Yes. In planning stage, expectations unclear, or no? Give people a moment to chime in. All right, we'll close the poll and share. So 30% are saying expectations are unclear, with 26% saying no, and 22% saying yes and in planning stage.
Okay, so 56 expectations unclear or no. 22, we could throw that in there as well. It's in planning. So really only 22% of the people are actually getting perhaps some oversight of those two skill sets. Okay, good to know. Good to know. So then, if your role is to create a culture of resilience, your job role, drive, job function, transactional leadership, do the sprints. The support job purpose, transformation role, do the marathon. You as a leader have to create on the job function transactional side all the processes that protect and drive the mission, get things done, what we do. Most middle managers are pretty comfortable with that. Most frankly, people at all levels are pretty comfortable with the let's get her done. The marathon on the why we exist, the inspiring of engagement to the purpose, is less training for, I would say, aside. But why we exist and how we do that, I think if you put the two together, the what we do and why we're doing it in this pandemic, even outside the pandemic, you are on the way to creating a resilient organization. So both are required to manage during the transaction. I'm going to give you a chart here that shows you the leadership skills, the transactional leadership, and the transformational on certain domains, like the time frame domain of focus. Okay, transactional sprint, over and over again, get her done, project to project. The marathon is over time. How is this going? Is it meeting why we're here, what we expect to do together? The role of a leader in the transactional, define the mission, the tasks, lead the huddles, KPI, what we do. In the transformational, it's reimagine, inspire engagement, why we do what we do. The leadership skills required in the transactional, focus and drive, follow through, supporting teamwork, decisiveness, etc. We've said this. And then transformational, emotional intelligence, communication, develop these teams, coach them, mentor people, explore norms, culture norms, rebuild the long-term cultural resilience. The common statement in the transactional is, we can do this. This is how. You're teaching. In the transformational, tell me more. It's not teaching. It's telling me, it's asking people how they're doing. That powerful statement of tell me more. How can I help? The supervision in the transactional is monitoring, evaluating, rewarding, pushing. In the transformational, it's developing, it's exploring, it's inspiring, supporting. Tell me more. And the leaders focus on employees. In the transactional, it's compliance to strategy and task, and some disruptive innovation, pushing. On the transformational side, it's your helping with people with their self-esteem, recognition and team support, celebrations, sustaining innovations, things over time, little things that we've changed that actually make us get there all together in the long run. So best practice checklist for huddles. Since huddles are part of transactional work, and you got to build a marathon with huddles, the sprints. Let's take a huddle. Let's take these 3 lines: the huddle category, the sample leader coaching statement, and what an example of what kind of leadership it is. So the personal check-ins in a huddle. Every huddle starts with, "Is everybody okay? How's the family?" What is that? That's sort of a transformational piece. How are y'all doing? You know, it's holding people. The culture update is, no, we're not closing. Yes, you're dealing with miss. We're making changes, but we're not closing. That's still a transformational piece. You're talking about the marathon of the work. The monitoring of the dashboard, day by day, month by month, we're still here. That's very much a transactional piece. The new tasks, the huddles are working. You're assessing how the tasks are working. We're getting this. We're working well offsite, etc. That's a transactional piece. It's getting it done. The strategic updates. Hey, here's the overall plan, and here's a plan for today. Very transactional. How does today fit with tomorrow? And assessing morale, yes, Zoom works. You know what? It's better is it better than before for you than before? Are we doing okay with it? That's sort of a holding transformational comment about how's the team engaging around this? How's the morale? And the member report outs, let's all work together. How can we assist you? The sample the leader is saying, that's a very transformational component to how the leader in the coaching mode helps employees deal with how they're reporting about how they're doing. And then the pulse summary, it's the dashboards. Tenacity is working, everyday reports, KPIs. That's transactional. And the next meeting prep is all usually and should be a promise of future and ongoing connection. See you tomorrow. We will be here tomorrow. A lot of people wonder if the organization is going to be there tomorrow. Very transformational, holding people into today and tomorrow, the marathon. So if you want to think about leadership storytelling and what you have to do as a leader, I love this old parable by the Majid of Dubno in the 18th century. Naked Truth walked down the street one day. People turned their eyes away. People arrived draped in decoration. People greeted Parable with celebration. It is hard to look at Naked Truth, Parable explained. Parable dressed Naked Truth in stories, fine attire, stories, with metaphor, poignant prose, and plots to inspire. People opened the doors and served them their best. Naked Truth, dressed in story, was a welcome guest. And isn't that kind of what we have to do as leaders? We have to tell the naked story, but in a way that people see it as a metaphor, describing the mood states that people have lived through and the grief. Metaphors, I think, are power tools. They jumpstart disruptive innovation required to lead people through stages of grief, so people can get this, sprint to run the marathon of resilience in a crisis. And they set the stage for the transactional components that have to be strung together. So why I lead stories can be used as a leader's guide to enable resilience. So I think leaders, need to sort of explore that a little bit, and that's for another day to talk about. So reflections on the journey. So a leader can tell a story like this. Remember when we were in denial, angry, and bargaining for the way it once was? You remember that? And then everybody in the room can say, oh yeah, man, well, it's a hard time. Remember how we grieved the old normal and found acceptance? Oh yeah, we did it, or we didn't do it. We're still back. Remember how we redefined our culture and became more resilient? We talked about those myths. We improved on some of them. Remember what happened when we accepted the change and began to find new purpose and meaning? Yeah, we got on our pony and we started to move. So now that we've talked about this, what we're going to send you, and you've seen them today, there's some step-by-step decision trees that help you recast culture. And we're going to send those out to you, how to think about managing stages of grief and stages of team development, sort of one-page checklist on managing purpose and meaning, on also managing cultural resilience and myths, and how do you do this transactional, transformational stuff, and then how do you manage team huddles, and perhaps we'll send something out also on managing leader EQ, simple little things that help you move inside a little bit and experience yourself. So there we are. Remember, team leadership is the essential skill in all organizations. It doesn't happen without this skill. And I hope I've given you some color of things to think about through the pandemic about how to do it. Sprinting and marathons. Okay.
Thank you, Rob, so very much for a really powerful and fast-paced, information-filled dialogue on how leaders can create meaning in the future of work. A really great start to the series that will follow, and we welcome everyone back next Thursday, the 25th of February at 12 noon Eastern Time, where David Drew, one of your colleagues and faculty members for TLD Group, will speak about how leaders can embrace virtual technologies and alternative talent sources and collaborative workplaces to empower individuals and delegate effectively and focus on the right results. You have provided today great insight on the critical areas leaders need to develop for creating a strong and resilient culture. We do have some questions and a few minutes left, so let me start, and hopefully we can get through all of them. If not, we will post those following the presentation to all of the attendees today. So the first question that came in is, it worries me that our leaders may not have the psychological skills to address employee grief in our organization. So how do we prepare them?
That's a good question. And I do know that organizations have, many have EAP, employee assistance programs, and organization development functions in HR. And certainly an employee can go and embrace the EAP wisdom and the organization development provider on some of this to help them deal with grief and to get some thinking about it. I do think that frankly, we do this as people, as human beings, as parents, as lovers, as friends. We do process. Whether it's at home at the dinner table, used to be sitting at the bar and having a beer together, whatever. So we do have these skills in our arsenal. It's just, I think, almost giving ourselves permission to start. I think the best way to start is just to say, tell me more how you're doing. It's amazing how powerful and healing that skill is. But then, create some partners with EAP and your OD staff. And get some managers together and have a huddle and think about sharing together.
Great. Another question. As our organization has left the organizational purpose rollout to the CEO and culture assessment to HR, how do we train leaders to develop these specific leadership competencies you talked about today?
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that some of the checklists that I gave, and particularly the one about job function and job purpose. It's really often inspiring when you sit down with employees and say, tell me, how did you decide to be a nurse? What do you like about the function of being a nurse? That's about being a function of being on this team with me where we've got to go take care of patients on the floor, or we have to be, if we're not in the hospital, if we're in a different kind of job, we're in a manufacturing. What do you like about making a part work? Tell me about why that function is important to you. But then also tell me what your purpose is at this stage of your life. What are you trying to do? Trying to be a great parent? Trying to be an inspiring coworker? Trying to create a way in which teams feel happy together in the stress of work? Why are you here? Why did you come to this company? Why on this team? I think that those discussions on job function and job purpose at a very base level get the whole thing that Simon Sinek's talking about organizational purpose on the roll. Organizational purpose can sometimes be too lofty for employees. That's not why they're there. If you're a pediatric nurse manager, you're there to make sure that every patient gets their vitals taken. But really you're there so that all those kids go home to their mommies and daddies safe. So, those discussions are very powerful and generate a lot of discussion about team. And then you can hook it into, well, how do you think this fits with this organizational purpose that we hear out there, the CEO talking about? If there's a disconnect, you as a leader can go tell the CEO, we got a problem, Houston.
Yeah. Excellent. A few more that just came in. As leaders, how can we check in with ourselves in the moment to determine if a scenario calls for transactional or transformational leadership?
Check in with ourselves. That's such a great question. You know, and as a person who maybe resisted meditation for a long time, I found that those skills of checking in with myself are really, really good. And obviously some of those are breath related and just, you know, how's my body temperature and how am I doing and, you know, physically. But checking in with yourself, you can set your own checklist up. How am I checking with myself about managing people's annoyance at this new stage called storming? How am I dealing with everybody being really annoyed about it? Am I personalizing it? And if I am, maybe I need to say something about that. Hey, folks, you guys are so mad. Am I doing something? Or is it just that we're just mad about what's happening? I think having the lexicon and the language of what happens in each of these stages of grief or stages of team development can lead to a question, lead to a way to check in with yourself that you can then check in with the team. It gives you a language system. That's why I love to make sure that leaders, as they learn how to lead, are sharing it with their employees. So the employees get a sense of the language that the leader is leading with. So that language is shared with the employees and they see it. It frankly makes you a better leader.
Okay. And what types of activities and exercises can be helpful in reconnecting team members with purpose quickly?
Well, that function and purpose is certainly one. I do think, I think to be honest, underlying purpose in an organization are myths. And, you know, myths can be really fun, a little sometimes dangerous to explore, but there's so many myths that go on in organizations about why we're really here or what this company is really trying to do. Are they just making money, or do they care about the bottom line, or do they care about us as employees? I think exploring those myths with employees is really powerful. Frankly, if you do it right, there's a lot of humor in the room. People laugh at you know, some of the most ridiculous things that they think are true about the way in which things happen in the company. But sometimes they reveal something that is happening that needs to not happen anymore. And so both can happen. So I think, you know, I would say use the myth exercise to talk about culture. It gets back to purpose fairly quickly.
And that reminds me for everybody, the handouts are really packed with great information about how to take these exercises and implement them in your own organization. So please download them in the dialog box on GoToWebinar, and we'll also send them out afterwards. Okay, two more, because we have 2 more minutes left. Rob, can you tell a story about how you have done this work with clients recently?
That's a good question. Yes, I can. I'm working in a large health system, a tertiary system with community hospitals, and I'm working with department chairs on revitalizing the way they are working with in the pandemic. And we have had all of these discussions. We've actually, with the chairs, I've been suggesting we create an executive team of leaders that extends beyond the vice chairs. Usually in academic medical centers, you have vice chairs who have specific roles. And I've suggested that we add other people who are doing other kinds of work in the organization. Some of them may be the business leader assigned to that chair. It could be a person who's dealing with quality and the quality officer in the organization, and creating an executive team that then goes and does this work, works on the purpose statement of the team, works on what is the transactional skills of getting it done. Physicians don't have this language necessarily. They have language about drilling down into a diagnosis, getting into going right down the decision tree. They're superb at that, which means they can be superb at looking at what needs to happen and what's not happening. So that diagnostic capability, you know, reframing that as a medical skill into a transactional leadership skill is really helpful for them. And then it also gets to, we're also here to cure illness. And that gets to the transformational side. How you hold a patient and give them the bad news. How then do we help all of our new residents with that same concept of having to give the bad news? That is a human skill that needs to be developed. So we can, as a executive team, create the processes to make that happen. And that's what we're doing.
Excellent, excellent. And then in the last 30 seconds, last question, how
Yeah.
flexible and lenient should managers be in performance management in light of the challenges of the pandemic?
I think that's an excellent question. And I think if there's ever a time for leniency, it is now, because people are, I do believe, suffering. If you look across the country, it's reported everywhere. Grief is happening. People are off their pins. And so if you focus on our usual performance management system and, write that report up that has all the deficits of what you didn't get done, I think you lose the workforce. It requires empathy at this moment. It requires flexibility and the ability to engage on the other side, the transformational pieces, coaching, mentoring, supporting, purpose, helping them think through how it's going at home, anything that they can do, get some support, maybe go to EAP, etc. There's online psychotherapy burgeoning and booming. So there are things that you can do. I think we must move into the holding environment. If we do that, employees will come back in gangbusters. They will be very happy with the way the leaders accepted that support was necessary before we go back to that transactional doing focus.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Rob, so much for keeping us on time. Lots of great information. Again, we encourage everyone to access the handouts, practice what you've learned today, and come back to us next week for the next session in our series on the future of work. Thank you all very, very much. Have a great afternoon wherever you are, and stay safe and healthy. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.